It is a grey September morning in 1846, and an Irish tenant farmer is standing at the edge of a field that betrayed him overnight. Yesterday it was green. This morning the stalks are black, slumped into the mud, and the smell hits him before he even reaches them. A wet, sweet stench of rot that he already knows means death. He kneels, digs his fingers into the cold ground, and lifts out what should be a potato. It comes apart in his hand, a foul, gray slime. And he understands, in that single second, exactly what is coming. There is nothing left to eat. Not for him, not for his wife, not for his children, not for his whole village, until a harvest that is a year away. Hold on that man for a moment, because what makes it unbearable is this. Down the road behind him, carts loaded with grain and butter are rolling toward the port to be shipped abroad out of a starving country. He watches them pass, and he says nothing. Now here's the part you need to understand. This man was not a fool, and he was not unlucky. He was caught in a trap that had been years in the making. A trap laid the moment a whole nation bet its survival on a single plant. And that plant, the one failing him now, was the very same tuber that mountain peoples an ocean away had once worshipped as a god, that Europe had once burned in terror as the food of the devil, and that today is the single most ordinary thing in your kitchen. What people once died for the lack of, you now leave to go cold on the side of your plate. So how did we get here? How did a mountain root that Europe once feared like a plague come to rule the stomach of the entire planet? And why does it still rule us without our ever noticing? This is the story of the humblest thing you own, and it is far darker than you think. But this story does not begin in an Irish field, and it does not begin with rot. It begins more than 10,000 years earlier, and an entire ocean away, in the one place on Earth where something so fragile could become the foundation of everything. Forget Ireland for a moment. Forget Europe. Forget the frying pan. Forget the paper bag of fries. We're going up, high into the mountains, to the very edge of the habitable world, where the cold and the thin air kill almost everything alive, where neither wheat nor maize nor the human being himself could survive, if it were not for one single plant that learns to hide its life beneath the ground. Climb with me, in your mind, up to Lake Titicaca, nearly 4,000 meters above the sea, on what is today the border between Peru and Bolivia. The air is so thin that a newcomer's vision swims. At night, the frost turns the earth to stone. By day, a merciless mountain sun beats down. The soil is poor and stony. Grain does not ripen here. It simply freezes. And in this natural laboratory of death, some 8,000 years ago, and by some findings even earlier, human beings do something that will quietly change the future of the entire species. They find a wild tuber. On its own, it is almost inedible, small, bitter, loaded with the natural poisons the plant uses to keep itself from being dug up and eaten. But these people are patient as the mountains themselves. Generation after generation, they choose the tubers that are a little bigger, a little sweeter, a little less toxic. They domesticate the wild plant. And they get something they call, in their language, Quechua, papa, the potato. And it is not a garnish on their table, not a minor detail. It is the very foundation on which human life in the high mountains becomes possible at all. Do you understand what is at stake here? In the Andes, the potato is not a side dish. It is the exact difference between a civilization existing in these mountains and there being no civilization here at all. A plant that gives more calories from a patch of ground than any grain that grows underground where neither hail nor wind can strike it, that needs no mill and no oven to become food. Hold on to that thought. It will explain everything that follows. Whoever commands a plant like that commands the very possibility of survival. And the Andean farmers did not merely grow the potato, they engineered it. They cut stone terraces into the steep slopes to hold the soil and the warmth. They devised clever systems of raised beds and channels that gave back to the plants at night the heat they had soaked up by day, saving the crop from the killing frost. And above all, over thousands of years, they bred not one variety, but thousands. Different in color, shape, taste, and hardiness. Varieties for the warm valleys below, and varieties for the icy upper slopes where nothing else will hold. Red, purple, yellow, almost black, smooth and twisted like gnarled fingers. This was not a vegetable patch. It was a living library, an insurance policy against famine. If one variety failed, another held. If a disease struck one, hundreds of unlike varieties grew beside it. Pay close attention to this detail, because it is the whole lesson learned here. Thousands of different varieties as a shield against disaster. Thousands of years later, and an ocean away, human beings will forget that lesson completely, bet everything on a single clone, and that forgetting will cost 1 million lives. But let us not get ahead of the story. First, the piece of genius without which no empire could ever have risen in these mountains. The potato has a simple, treacherous flaw. It is nearly 4/5 water, which means it rots fast. How do you store it in a world without a single refrigerator? The Andeans solved the problem by turning the mountains themselves against it. They scatter the tubers on the ground and leave them to the freezing night. The water inside freezes and bursts the cells. By day, the sun comes and the potatoes thaw. People walk over them barefoot, pressing out the moisture. And so on, in a cycle. Freeze, thaw, press, for days on end, until the tuber is dry, light, hard, and almost weightless. This is chuño, in essence, the first freeze-dried food in history, many centuries before any industry. And here's what genuinely astonishes. Chuño does not keep for months. It keeps for years, and by some accounts up to 10, 15, even 20 years. Think for a second what that means for the people who invented it. This is food you can store a decade ahead. Food that outlives any failed harvest, any drought, any war. Food you can carry on your back across mountain passes and feed to an army hundreds of kilometers from your own field. A people who have chuño stop fearing hunger, and a people who have stopped fearing hunger are freed for something else. They can make war, build, rule. This was not just dried potato. This was power over time. To feel what that meant, stand for a moment beside one of those mountain men. It is early morning. the slope climbs up and vanishes into the clouds. He walks his fields scattered at different heights, and that is not carelessness but precise calculation. Down in the warmth he has one variety, higher up another, hardier against the cold. And just below the line of the eternal snows, where absolutely nothing else survives, a third, bitter but stubborn, that will save the family if the frost takes the fields below. He does not count his wealth in coins. He counts it in varieties and in sacks of chuño against the bad day. The tuber is, to him, food and medicine and calendar and his daughter's dowry and an offering to the gods. He does not know the word biodiversity, but he lives it every single day because he grasped what cost his ancestors thousands of years of trial and error. Do not put everything in one basket. Do not stake your life on a single plant. And there is one of those flashes of understanding that this whole story is really about. Centuries later, humanity will build an entire global food precisely by breaking this simple mountain rule, and pay dearly for it. But the Andean farmer on his slope does not yet know that, and cannot. He simply bends down, works the cold earth with his foot plow, and plants the future in it. And that power was put to full use. By the 15th century, the Inca have built the largest state of pre-Columbian America. It runs along the spine of the Andes for thousands of kilometers, from present-day Colombia to Chile. Millions of subjects, stone roads, temples, disciplined armies. We are used to thinking that empires stand on gold and iron. This one stood on the potato. Across the country, the Inca built stone storehouses. They called them cocas, and in them, alongside maize, lie mountains of chuño, a strategic reserve with which, in a lean year, officials, soldiers, and labor-drafted peasants are fed. The tuber is so vital that it grows into the religion itself. The Andeans have Axomama, a mother goddess of the potato, and they pray to her for a good harvest. They heal with it, raw slices pressed to fractures and wounds. They lay tubers in graves, provision for the dead on their journey. Even time in the field is measured by how long it takes a potato to cook. Here in these cold mountains, the potato becomes, for the first time in history, not merely food, but a lever of power. Whoever holds the storehouses holds the answer to the question of who survives the winter. Burn that idea into your memory. Power over the necessary, because it will return again and again, right up to the present day. But while the Inca worship their tuber, across the ocean men are already caulking and tarring ships who care nothing for the potato or its gods. They are lured only by the gleam of metal. And the meeting of those two worlds will bring the humble tuber the darkest chapter of its youth. In 1532, the Spanish arrive, and the Inca Empire collapses with terrifying speed. The conquistadors are hunting gold and silver, and at first they barely notice the strange route of the natives. But in 1545, in the mountains of what is now Bolivia, they find Cerro Rico, the rich mountain, a colossal vein of silver that for 2 centuries will flood Europe with precious metal, pay for its wars, its cathedrals, and its luxury. And to tear that silver from the earth, the Spanish need hands. Thousands, tens of thousands of hands. Indigenous people herded into forced labor under a system they called the mita. People went down into the suffocating, deadly shafts of Potosi and often never came up. And here surfaces the irony that runs a chill down your spine. What did they feed these doomed men so they could work at all in the thin air of 4,000 meters? That same chuño, potato. The very tuber that for thousands of years had given the Andean peoples life now gave them the strength to die slowly in someone else's mines. Silver flowed to Spain on the energy of the potato. Here the story stops being about food for the first time and becomes about blood, the most necessary thing, the thing that fed people, became fuel for the machine that ground down the very people who grew it. And along the way, the Spanish branded the tuber with a confusion that lives in our languages to this day. They muddled the Andean papa with the batata, the Caribbean word for the sweet potato, an entirely different plant. And out of that mash came the word patata. From it would grow the English potato and dozens of other names across the world. Our everyday potato still carries the scar of a stranger's mistake made 500 years ago. Around the 1570s, the first tubers crossed the Atlantic and reached Spain, and from there they scatter across Europe. And here begins something that is hard to believe today. Europe did not accept the potato. It feared it and pushed it away for nearly 2 centuries. Look at the tuber through the eyes of a 16th century European. It grows underground, in the dark, already suspicious because honest food reaches for the sun. It reproduces not by seed like God-fearing grain, but by pieces of itself, as if there were something unclean, something witch-like in that. It belongs to the nightshade family, and its poisonous cousins grow right beside it. Belladonna, thornapple, and learned herbalists eye it with distrust. It is not in the Bible. Neither the patriarchs nor the apostles ate it, so a decent Christian has no need of it. And green tubers, the ones left out in the light, really do poison you. People who did not know how to store them fell ill, and that confirmed the worst suspicions again and again. Rumors spread. The potato gives you leprosy. It bloats the body. It brings on fever and lust. It is the food of the devil. And of course, it grows in hell, underground. For centuries, the potato in Europe is pig feed, slop for prisoners and beggars, the thing a self-respecting person would never put on their own table. Keep this contrast in mind because it is the key. What was, to the Inca, a gift of the gods and the backbone of an empire, was to the Europeans the food of hell and fodder for livestock. The same tuber. The only difference is who is looking at it and what they are willing to see in it. And in that contempt, the potato stayed stuck a long time, because to the fear was added something more stubborn than fear, the pride of class. The potato became a badge of poverty. It filled the belly of whoever had nothing else to eat. It was a confession of misery. The rich ate white bread and meat. The poor ate earthy tubers, and nobody wanted to step down a rung by choice. Even where the potato slowly took hold among the poorest, and the first in Europe to truly reach for it were precisely those who had no choice, it stayed a food of shame, not of pride. And there lay the trap for whole nations. The rulers already understood what the people did not. This plant could save a country from famine. It gave twice, sometimes 3 times the food from the same land. It fed an army. But how do you make people eat what they despise and fear at the same time? By pleading, impossible. And so it is not preachers who set to work, but kings. Not by kindness, by force and by cunning. The first to try was a man in a crown, Frederick the Great, King of Prussia. He thinks with the cold logic of a machine of state. His country is scythed by famine every time the wheat fails, and the potato grows where grain will not and is harder to destroy. The logic is simple. The people will plant it, and that is that. From the middle of the 18th century, he issues decrees, the famous potato order, and sends tubers and instructions out to the villages. The peasants dig in their heels, screw up their faces, answer that not even a dog would eat this filth. By legend, the king threatens to cut off the noses and ears of any who refuse to grow it, though there is no evidence the threat was ever carried out. And then, if the tale is to be believed, Frederick makes a move that strikes not at fear, but at human nature itself, at envy. He declares the potato a royal vegetable, plants it in his own fields, and posts an armed guard around them, but secretly orders the soldiers to guard it carelessly, to yawn, to look away, to doze at their posts, and at night to leave altogether. The calculation is brilliant in its simplicity. If a thing is guarded so carefully, then it must be valuable. Then it must be worth stealing. And the Prussian peasants begin to steal the royal tuber and plant it in secret in their own gardens. What would not work under threat of a knife worked through envy and greed. And the potato passed its trial by fire during the 7 Years' War, when armies rolled across the German lands, trampling and burning everything above the ground, while the potato waited out the disaster calmly in the earth, invisible and whole, feeding those whose grain had long since been taken. Think about that. To feed people the very food that was saving their lives, those people first had to be tricked into believing that food was a luxury for the chosen few. And meanwhile, across the border in France, the exact same con was being prepared by a man who had learned the taste of the potato in the bitterest way possible. His name was Antoine Augustin Parmentier, a French apothecary. During that same 7 Years' War, he was taken prisoner by the Prussians, and more than once, and the prisoners there were fed almost nothing but potatoes, that very food for livestock which, as everyone devoutly believed back home in France, left a man covered in leprosy and rotting alive. The months of captivity pass. Parmentier does not fall ill with leprosy. He does not die, does not even waste away. He stays healthy and strong on that devil's diet. And in his head, a revolution takes place. The thing his whole homeland calls a poison has just saved his life. Back in France, he becomes an obsessed apostle of the potato. He writes treatises, wins scientific prizes, proves to the doctors that the tuber is safe and nourishing, and in 1772, the Paris Faculty of Medicine officially declares the potato fit for human consumption, lifting a de facto ban that had stood for years. But declaring it is not enough. The people still turn up their noses. The fear sits too deep. And so Parmentier stages a genuine spectacle at the very heart of fashionable life. He throws lavish dinners where everything, course after course, is made of potato, and invites the celebrities of the age. Among his guests are Benjamin Franklin and the great chemist Antoine Lavoisier. He carries bouquets of delicate potato flowers to King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette, and they show them off in public, a flower in the king's buttonhole, a flower in the queen's powdered hair, and the courtiers rush at once to imitate the fashion. And then, around 1781, the king grants him a plot of poor land outside Paris, on the plain of Sablon, and Parmentier repeats the Prussian trick down to the gesture. By day, his potato field is guarded by armed soldiers, as if a treasure were buried there. And by night, the guard is quietly withdrawn, and the Parisians steal the precious tubers for their own gardens. And the deception works again. The tuber they fled from yesterday like the plague becomes, in a single generation, a fashionable, almost aristocratic food. Potato dishes in France are still named after him, Parmentier. There is the same refrain that sounded in the Andes and will sound again. The thing people feared would give them leprosy now adorned the head of a queen. But why did the potato win in the end, not only where kings drove it in, but everywhere? Because behind all the cons and decrees lay a hard, merciless arithmetic of survival. From the same field it gave far more calories than wheat. It grew underground, safe from the armies that trampled the grain, and it needed neither mill nor oven to become food. For the laborer, for the soldier, for the city bursting at its seams, it was not a convenience, it was life itself. And now about the names, because in them the memory is hidden. The word papa comes straight from Quechua. The Spanish tangled it with the Caribbean batata, and out of that came patata, and from that mash sprouted the English potato. In German, the potato is Kartoffel, and that word comes in turn from the Italian tartufolo, truffle. Europeans saw a tuber that hides underground just like a truffle and named it after the underground fungus. In English, it is still fondly called a spud, after the narrow spade you dig it up with. And so in the very words we use to name the potato, the whole history of its long, hard road into an alien world is written. And just how powerful a weapon that tuber had become was shown, better than anything, by one strange, almost comic episode. In 1778, Prussia and Austria clashed in a war over the Bavarian succession that went down in history for the opposite of a war. Vast armies planted opposite one another that instead of fighting battles, set about digging up and eating the potatoes in the neighboring fields, trying to leave the enemy without food. Whoever ran out of potatoes first lost. When the tubers of the district were gone, the war simply fizzled out, and contemporaries aptly nicknamed it the Potato War. Two great powers waging a campaign not with cannon, but with spades. That was when it became clear that whoever feeds his soldiers on this hardy tuber will outlast the one who trusted only in bread. And across Europe, the potato spread unevenly. In one place, the poor with nothing to lose grabbed it first. In another, it stayed livestock feed. And on one green island in the west, the poorest peasants were already planting it so densely and so blindly that they were preparing their own catastrophe. But of that, more shortly. And here unfolds the quietest and perhaps the most immense consequence of this whole story. While the politicians schemed and the peasants grumbled and stole, the potato was doing what no king achieved with his decrees. It was changing the demographics of entire continents. There is a famous study by the economists Nathan Nunn and Nancy Quinn, published in one of the leading scientific journals. By their cautious, most modest estimate, the arrival of the potato accounts for roughly a quarter of all the growth in population and urbanization of the Old World between 1700 and 1900. Stop on that number for a second. A quarter. One single plant, brought from across the ocean. The mechanism is simple and all the more astonishing for it. More food from the same land means fewer infants die, fewer families are cut down by hunger, and above all, hands are freed that once went entirely into the eternal, grinding struggle for a piece of bread. And those freed hands flowed into the cities, into the manufactories, to the first factory looms. The potato, yesterday's food of the devil and pig feed, quietly, without a single shot, fed the very human mass without which there would have been no swollen cities, no factories, no industrial revolution. There is the refrain in its full force. What was recently thought a poison and a shame became the invisible fuel on which the whole modern world was raised, including the world you are living in right now. But every fuel has a dark underside. The more heavily a whole people leans on one plant, the more terrible the fall if that plant one day fails it. And on the western edge of Europe, on a green island, a trap was already snapping shut on an entire nation. That nation was Ireland, and its fate is the bitterest page in the whole biography of the potato. The tuber came here and took root as nowhere else. It grew gladly in Ireland's poor, damp, stony ground, where almost nothing else would. And it fed a population of poor tenant farmers that was growing at explosive speed. But you have to understand the conditions they lived in. Ireland was in effect a colony of Britain. The best land was held by English landlords, and the Irish tenants were crammed onto tiny plots from which sustenance could be squeezed only one way, by planting the potato, the one crop that gave enough calories from such a scrap of earth. By the middle of the 19th century, millions of Irish, an estimated 3 million, depended on the potato as their main and often their only food. And here lay the fatal, deadly error that had been ripening for years. Remember the thousands of different varieties the Andeans guarded for centuries, precisely as insurance against disaster? In Ireland, they bet it all on one. Almost the entire country planted a single variety, the lumper, a productive, undemanding tuber that could feed a family on the smallest plot. And because the potato reproduces not by seed, but by pieces of the tuber, every lumper on the island was, in essence, a genetic copy, a clone of every other lumper. A whole people fed on a single plant, and that plant was one giant clone repeated 1,000,000 times over. Not one plant had a drop of defense that its neighbor did not also lack. Pay attention to this detail because it explains the whole horror of what came next. This was no longer a vegetable patch. It was a powder keg the size of a country, waiting for a single spark. The spark came in the autumn of 1845. From North America, most likely aboard merchant ships, a microscopic killer slipped into Europe, an organism called Phytophthora infestans, the late blight, the potato rot. In the cool, damp, foggy Irish climate, it found its paradise. Its invisible spores travel on the wind and the rainwater, and in the right weather, it can wipe out a whole field in a matter of days. The leaves blacken and collapse, and the tubers in the ground turn to a stinking, rotting slime. And here the story stops, finally, being about kings, trade, and clever tricks. It becomes about death. Think for a second. In 1845, the disease ruined between 1/3 and 1/2 of the crop across the whole country. And in 1846, it came back and wiped out almost everything. Imagine you are an Irish farmer. You walk out in the morning to a field that stood green yesterday, and today is black, collapsed, and reeking of rot. And you understand that there is nothing left for you, your wife, your children, your whole village to eat until the next harvest. And not for 1 year, but several in a row. People boil roadside grass and nettles, eat dogs, eat the rot, anything they can swallow. They die on the very roads, of hunger and of the fevers that finish off the starving. The year 1847 the Irish will remember forever as Black 47. Stop a second on what that looked like, not in figures, but in a single yard. A woman stands on the threshold of her mud cabin. In her arms is a child who no longer cries because it has no strength left to cry. Behind her, a dark, empty corner where a year ago a mountain of potatoes stood, enough for the whole winter. Her husband went to look for work on the public relief schemes where the hungry were herded for a bowl of soup, and did not come back. She looks at her field where the black stalks lie in the mud, and she knows that under the ground there is nothing but rot. The road in front of the house leads 2 ways: to the workhouse, where there is crowding, typhus, and almost no food, and to the port, to a ship that will carry her across the ocean if she has the money for the fare and the strength to reach it alive. There are hundreds of thousands of yards like hers on the island, and the most unbearable thing is that somewhere nearby, along that same road, carts of grain and butter creak toward the port to be exported. She follows them with her eyes and says nothing. Here, in that silence, the history of the potato hits its blackest bottom. The food that for thousands of years saved people from hunger kills them the moment it is taken away. By 1852, when the nightmare finally recedes, about 1 million people in Ireland are dead, and between 1 and 1.5 million more have fled the island, to America, to Canada, to Australia, packed into the holds of ships. So many died on the crossing that those vessels were nicknamed coffin ships. In a single decade, Ireland's population collapsed by about 1/4. But here is what turns this tragedy from natural into man-made and truly terrible. All that time, grain, cattle, and butter continued to be exported out of starving Ireland. Food grown by the very people who were dying of hunger. And the relief from the authorities, justified by the fashionable faith of the day that the state must not meddle in the affairs of the market, was shamefully, criminally scant. People did not die because there was no food left on the island. They died because the one food that was theirs, personally theirs, the potato, vanished overnight, and to all the rest, they simply were not allowed near. This was not only the disease of a plant, it was the difference between winter and starvation multiplied by indifference. This is the real price a people pays when it stakes its whole survival on a single clone. And the bitter echo of that price will sound for another century in the songs, in the memory, in the very fabric of an Irish nation now scattered across the whole world. And that island was not the only one to resist. When the potato reached the east of Europe, it met the same fear. In Tsarist Russia, they christened it the devil's apple. The rumor ran that it came from hell and that whoever planted it would damn his soul. And when the state tried to force it in the mid-19th century, the so-called potato riots broke out. Peasants who burned the plantings, refused to sow, and fought the soldiers, who put the revolts down with gunfire. In more than one corner of the continent, forcing a people to eat the food that was saving it from death cost blood. And yet, look what happened next, because it is the most incredible irony in this whole story. In just a couple of generations, that same potato that fields were burned over and soldiers called out for became the very heart of the cuisine of those same peoples, the second bread of Russian and Eastern European tables, the base of dishes now considered as native as if they had existed since the beginning of time. The grandson cannot imagine a single day without the potato his grandfather took up a pitchfork against. There is the refrain again in its fullness. What fields were burned over and blood was spilled over yesterday, today smells of home, of childhood, of a mother's hands. No people that fell in love with the potato remembers any longer that it once feared it like a plague. This is the quiet, almost eerie power of food. It erases its own history. It became too ordinary to remember. And that is a shame. Toward the end of the 19th century, and above all in the 20th, the potato conquers the world for good, and no longer as a foreign curiosity, but as the very bedrock of things, as if it had always been here. In Germany, in Poland, in Russia, across all of Eastern Europe, it grows into the national cuisine itself, into the very idea of home food. And in the most terrible, catastrophic years of the new century, in the world wars, in the sieges, in the ruin, it is the potato that again and again turns out to be the last line standing between people and death by starvation. Hardy, filling, growing right under your feet, the food of last hope when everything else has been taken by war and want. The same tuber that once fed Inca soldiers and Prussian peasants now feeds soldiers, refugees, and besieged cities of the new industrial age. The wheel of history had come full circle. When the familiar world collapsed, when the siege cut off a city, when the front burned the fields, people turned again, just as the Prussian peasants and the Andean highlanders before them, to the thing you can grow on any scrap of waste ground and pull straight out from under your feet. It became, once more, exactly what it was for the man on the Andean slope, the difference between winter and starvation. Think how many times over 10,000 years one and the same scene repeated. A human being on the edge of hunger bends to the earth and lifts a potato from it. Only the faces, the languages, and the centuries changing. The plant once despised as the shameful food of the poor becomes at last the quiet, invisible guarantor of survival for hundreds of millions of people. And before you look back at your own plate, notice the loop this tuber closed. It was born in America, in the Andean mountains, but to North America, where its greatest fields stretch today, it came not directly, but the long way round, across the ocean, first over the sea to Europe, rejected and ridiculed, and only from there, in the holds of immigrant ships, back across the Atlantic, home, to the continent where it all began. The plant went all the way around the planet to return to where it started, but it returned unrecognizable. In America, it found endless fields, like the famous potato plains of Idaho. And it was here, in the 20th century, that the humble mountain tuber lived out its last great transformation. Someone thought to cut it into thin strips and fry it in boiling oil to a golden, crisp crust. And those fries went from a street snack to the perfect product of the industrial age. Cheap, recognizable, identical, addictive. The fast food empire seized on it and carried it across the whole planet, to every city, to every roadside. And so a circle 10,000 years long closes, the sacred papa of the Inca, the devil's food of frightened Europe, the second bread of the eastern villages, all of it flowing in the end into a little bag of golden strips under a neon sign. What was worshipped as a goddess is now dunked in a sauce without lifting your eyes from your phone. Stop for a second on that contrast, and then look around yourself right now. Today, the potato is the fourth most important food crop on the whole planet, behind only wheat, rice, and maize. The world grows something on the order of 390 million tons of it a year, a figure hard even to imagine. And the largest producer is no longer Europe, which once feared it so, nor America. It is China, about a quarter of all the world's potato, tens of millions of tons, with India, Ukraine, and Russia behind it. The tuber born in the cold Andes, the one Europe shied from for 2 centuries, has become a strategic, vital crop for billions of people on Earth. But look closely at what it has turned into on your table and mine. A huge share of the harvest in the developed world now goes not to the home, to the pot, but to industrial processing, to frozen fries, to chips, to dried flakes. Behind that golden, crisp strip in the paper bag stands a whole industrial empire. Gigantic fields sown with 1 or 2 specially bred varieties tuned to the needs of fast food, like the famous russet Burbank, that potato of the perfect elongated shape from which the ideal long fry is made. The fry from a bag on one continent tastes exactly like the one on another, thousands of kilometers away, and that is no accident, but an engineering design. One variety, one standard of shape and color, one recipe, repeated across the whole planet. What the man on the Andean slope guarded as 1,000 different treasures, the global industry has shrunk to a handful of flawlessly identical clones, because uniformity is cheaper and easier to process. And that uniformity has a price. No one prints on the packet. The vast monoculture fields demand vast doses of chemicals because they are defenseless against disease and pests. And the tuber itself, which for thousands of years was an honest, whole, life-saving food, comes to us more and more as an over-fried, over-salted, fast food product, stripped of almost everything good. The humble hero of this story, the one that fed billions, has quietly turned on our table into its own opposite. And here the story comes full circle and looks us straight in the eye without blinking. Once again, exactly like the Irish on the eve of the Great Famine, we are staking a giant share of world production on a handful of genetically almost identical clones. And Phytophthora, that invisible killer of the Irish fields, has gone nowhere. Even today, it costs world agriculture billions, and the only thing holding it back is constant chemical treatment year after year. We did not defeat that ancient trap of monoculture. We simply sprayed it with pesticides and scaled it up to the whole planet. And meanwhile, in those same Andean villages, the old Quechua still carefully guard their thousands of multicolored, knobbly, unlike varieties, a living genetic ark, the insurance policy of all humanity, whose very existence most of us do not even suspect while peeling a potato for dinner. And that insurance has a concrete address, In a district on the outskirts of Lima, in Peru, stands the International Potato Center, which guards the largest potato gene bank in the world. Thousands upon thousands of cultivated varieties and wild relatives kept in cold storage against the day when a blight, a climate gone mad, or a war threatens the planet's harvests. Think about it. The safeguarding of the whole world's food rests, in the end, on the very same wisdom that farmer on the slope practiced every morning thousands of years ago. Do not put everything in one basket. And the central thesis of this whole story renews itself one last time. Once, who planted the potato and how they ate it was decided by a king under threat of cut-off ears and a minister under cover of soldiers' bayonets. Now it is decided for us, quietly, by corporations, with a line on a label, a clause in a contract, the very shape of the fry on your tray. The power over the thing without which a human being cannot survive has gone nowhere. It has simply become invisible as the tuber itself, hidden in the dark earth. And that touches you directly, right now, every time you go out for food. And now, step back and look at all of this at once, whole. The most ordinary, the most boring thing in your kitchen, a potato you peel mechanically without looking, thinking of something else, holds within it the whole history of human power, of hunger, and of survival. A plant born in mountains where nothing else living survives. A gift that was a god to some peoples and a devil to others. The fuel that secretly, without a single shot, built the modern world, and the trap that killed 1 million people in a single decade. The thing fields were burned over and pitchforks taken up for, and the thing that now sits in every refrigerator, costing almost nothing and meaning, to us, absolutely nothing. This is what the most ordinary food on earth hides beneath its thin skin. What seems to us eternal, insignificant, and self-evident in fact, rests on a foundation kneaded from the blood, the fear, and the hope of dozens of generations we have forgotten. The most ordinary thing is almost always the most extraordinary. It simply stopped shouting about itself long ago and learned to fall silent under our hand. Remember that the next time you pick up a plain potato. Remember that behind it stand the stone storehouses of the Inca and the suffocating shafts of Potosi. Remember that over it kings deceived their own peoples, and peoples, in answer, took up pitchforks. Remember how many prayed to it as to a goddess, and how many died in the black fields when it betrayed them one day. Remember the mountain man who guarded 1,000 of its varieties on his slope, and the Irish woman who was left with none. Remember that armies warred over this humble tuber, and that with it, too, they fed the ones they sent to die in the mines. Remember that almost 1 in every 2 of us on earth owes their very existence, in part, to it, and to the quiet potato that fed the world as it grew. And the next time you reach for a plate of plain boiled potatoes, hold your hand for 1 second. You are holding the thing for whose absence 1 in 4 of a whole country once died. You are holding the thing that ruled, and still rules, the world without our noticing. If you have watched this story all the way to the end, subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories like this ahead of us, hidden in the most ordinary things, the ones you walk past every day without seeing. And be sure to write in the comments which moment surprised you most of all. the Chuño the Inca fed an entire empire on, the guarded field of the cunning Parmentier, the Irish fields blackened in a single night, or the seed bank in Lima that guards, for all of us today, the thousands of potatoes of the Andes. I really do want to know what struck you more than the rest.